never stop flying the airplane. Whatever you do, keep flying the airplane.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 148 of the Strokecast. This week's episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Modus Nova. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. And by the fine folks at Like-Minded. To find out if Like-Minded can help you live your best post-stroke life, visit strokecast.com/like-minded. Jeffrey Morse has been a pilot, an instructor, and now, after complications from an aneurysm surgery he really wasn't expected to survive, a spinal stroke survivor. Doctors told him he would pretty much remain paralyzed for the rest of his life. His new book is called Finding Forward. You Have the Will Within. That will is why he was ultimately able to walk out of the hospital despite what the doctors had expected. I like talking with Jeffrey because it's not just a powerful mindset that helped him recover. His career and his lifestyle in the air structured the way he looked at problems in his world and gave him the tools to, quote unquote, keep flying the airplane. So now, let's meet Jeffrey Morse. So Jeffrey, thanks so much for joining us today on the show.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thanks for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this for some time.
Oh, that's great. And I know we had certainly some challenges in getting connected here, but that's what we do in stroke life. We have challenges with connections in our head, and we figure out a way to get it done.
Yes, there's always a workaround.
There's always a workaround. So I think that is the motto for the occupational therapy organizations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
What was life like in those days and weeks leading up to your stroke?
The weeks leading up to it, in May of 2012, I had a scuba diving incident, and I had something called barotrauma. I had a hole in my eardrum that needed attention, so I was seeing an ear, nose, and throat specialist for that. Prior to it, I was doing really well. I was working out regularly, exercising regularly, eating well, very healthy, no problems at all. And all of a sudden in June 9th of 2012, I got a headache, and the headache wasn't going away. And 10 days later, the headache turned into a migraine. And all of a sudden, it's the worst migraine of my life. And when I went in to see the ear, nose, and throat doctor, he said, "Hey, I don't have anything to do with migraines. Go see your family doctor." So called the family doctor the next morning, got in, and oh my God, as soon as I get in there, he taking one look at me and realizing I'm in serious condition. Before I realize it, I'm in the hospital in the emergency room waiting to get a CAT scan. And at that point, I had something called photophobia. I couldn't handle light anymore. So when they transported me to the hospital, I had a blanket over my eyes. And I thought my head was going to explode. It hurt so bad. Before the day was through, I'm down in Charlotte, North Carolina at the Carolinas Medical Center, and I'm being admitted into neurosurgical ICU. And I had no idea where things were going to unfold. At that point in time in my life, I wasn't in control. Fate was in control. Mm-hmm. Things could have turned in one direction or the other. And in one direction, you're alive, and the other direction, you're not. And thankfully, the car kept turning in the direction where I was going to live. And it was like that for the next 10 days. But, when I started seeing the neurosurgical surgeon, asking him, how does this happen? I said, I'm 49 years old. I'm in great health. How in the world could I have an aneurysm? He said, people don't get to pick and choose. You could be the healthiest person in the world, and it just happened. So it could just be something that that happened at birth that you've had since you were a baby. And now it's finally manifesting itself and knocking on the door and welcoming itself into your presence. For the next 10 days in neurosurgical ICU, I was given medication to try to reduce my blood pressure. Thankfully, I had normal blood pressure, 120/80, and now they're lowering it to 70/50 in hope that they could reduce the aneurysm. But that didn't work. And the doctor finally came in one day and said, there's nothing else we can do. All that's left is to perform a surgery. And you need to know going into this that you've got less than a 25% chance of surviving the surgery. And I said, well, I'll take those odds. It's better than nothing. He went in and did the surgery. And when I woke up from it, I found I was paralyzed from the neck down. Life prior to all of that, I lived, and I still do live, a spectacular life. I had a career in the military, in the Air Force, that took me all over the world. After the Air Force, I got into a commercial international cargo airline, flying freight around the world. I was involved with Desert Shield and Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, in not only a military capacity with my reserve squadron, but a civilian capacity with my commercial flying job. So I was going over in my military uniform and my airline uniform. No regrets. I lived a full life. I think the things I learned through life certainly helped me while I was going through this new thing happening to me with the paralysis after waking up from the surgery, paralyzed. I lived enough of a life that after waking up paralyzed, with my life in question every second of the day, I said to myself, if things go in the wrong direction, I'm okay dying. I've lived a good life. I have no regrets, but I'm not going to throw the towel in at all. I'm going to figure my way through this. I lived one breath at a time, every breath, every second of every day, and every second and every breath of every day was a question mark. And it was like that for months. So I was bound and determined to find my way through it. And despite the panic and the claustrophobia of waking up paralyzed, the one thing I did think about in those first few moments was, hey, all right, you're paralyzed from the neck down, but from the neck up, everything works. Your brain works, your eyes work, your nose works, your mouth works. So get busy figuring things out. And as I thought about that, one of the next things on my mind was, hey, there's no instruction book for, what are we supposed to do when we wake up and we're paralyzed? What do we do first? What do we do second or third? And that's when it struck me that I needed to start making some goals. And the first one was, hey, you know what? Maybe one day you need to write about this. So, obviously you can't do it now, but one day you need to write about this. Write an instruction book about it. Tell people what you did as you went through this. So as people are dealing with it, they can read a story about what somebody else did to find their way through. And that's where I am now, and it feels terrific. Did I have to change the way I do things? Sure. But I wasn't going to let this issue define me. So life still is good. Yes, it's different, but I'm living and I'm enjoying life every day.
So I think one of the things that's interesting about that is with the military background and even flying into the Middle East commercially, you already have a job where you have to be prepared to potentially not come back. So going into the surgery, I imagine that experience helped prepare you for that.
It did. The other thing that helped prepare me from my military days was going through survival school, SEER training. I got to learn a different part of me. I got to meet a different part of me, like a different Jeff, a Jeff I didn't even know existed until I got into that environment. And one of the things I realized while going through that training was that if I set my mind towards something, nothing could invade that. You can beat on me physically, but you can't control my mind. And if I can make my way through and survive that experience, then I can survive anything. I used a lot of that training to get me through what happened with the paralysis. I knew I could use my brain. There's nothing wrong with it. So use it. Figure out how to build a better mousetrap here and make that happen. So I was very thankful for that. As far as my aviation career, militarily or commercially, yeah, I used those skills too. Never stop flying the airplane. Whatever you do, keep flying the airplane. That's how I thought about things as I was beginning what was to become my therapy routine. And along those lines, the other thing that I started using was something that I said to myself many, many years ago when I first started my aviation career, which was do things because you want to do them. Don't do things because you have to do them. So you commit to this and you commit 100%. And I said to myself, this is my job now. My job isn't aviation. My job is recovery. And I'm going to give that my full and undivided attention.
And one of the things I have encountered just in my conversations with aviation people and in various formats was that when something goes wrong in the cockpit, there are the order of priorities is aviate, navigate, and communicate. And as you just described that, figuring out, okay, I'm paralyzed from the waist down, but everything above still works. There's no instruction book. So let's go ahead and build that, and then let's communicate that with others. It sounds like you just sort of went through that process.
Well, yeah, and to add to that with the communication piece of it, one of the things I found over time was I wasn't speaking their language, they being the medical community, they being the people that work with you in Pilates or your neuromuscular massage therapist. So I had to learn that language to speak effectively to each of them, doctors, whoever it might be. So we were on the same page with what we were talking about every single time. How did I learn that? That was all, flying around the world and you're suddenly speaking to somebody that's 1,000 miles away. English is not their primary language, and you need to have a conversation with that person in a manner that both of you understand what's needed so bad things don't happen. So I took that into this process as well, and I started learning anatomy. Hey, I've got lots of time because this is my new job. So I'm going to learn to speak their language. So when I'm talking with them, I'm communicating effectively. And when they're talking back to me, I can make sure that they understand what I'm saying and I understand what they're saying. So, yeah, the communication piece of this was also vitally important.
And I found that especially physical therapists and occupational therapists, once you start asking them about the anatomy and about the details and about what muscle they're working on and what exactly is happening, they are thrilled to talk about it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You've just entered a whole new realm when it comes to that. Another place where this has the potential to help us or hinder us is suddenly you find you're home and you want to start getting into some kind of routine with some kind of workout program. And you decide, well, hey, I'm going to go to a gym and start doing some weight training. Well, your body's weak. It's not ready for that. And it's easy when you get into a gym environment for the person that's helping you to start giving you exercises that they would give to somebody that's not limited as you are. And those are not exercises for you. And you have to be careful, especially if you're limited and you're in a hemiparetic situation where you're trying to get muscle strength back and you're recruiting from other places. You could unintentionally hurt yourself. So you've got to be careful with that. And that's where this communication equally helps to make sure they understand, hey, if you're going to give me something, are you trained in working with somebody that's limited like myself? And if not, you might want to reconsider who you're working with so you don't get hurt. So those are all really important things. And that's where I found Pilates was really helpful.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of times the language just we generally use when we talk about our weak leg or our weak arm or our weak hand, it's really a misnomer because there is nothing wrong after stroke. There is nothing wrong with your arm. There's nothing wrong with your leg. There's nothing wrong with your hand. The problem is literally all in your head. It's all about the brain not talking to those muscles. And I think a lot of even folks who are focused on just physical and sports medicine rehab, they're used to helping you rebuild the muscles around those joints. But that's not the problem after stroke.
Correct. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You're hitting the target right in the middle there. It's not the limb. It's not the muscles. It's the connection's been disturbed and it needs to find a new direction, a new path to talk again. And what I found of that along the way over the years is the neuromuscular massage therapy and breaking down the fascia. Fascia's been my biggest enemy through this and breaking that down. And it's amazing when it's broken down and suddenly the nervous system has that circulation through those muscles again. Oh my God, it's just incredible what I get back in return. And now I can start growing good muscle memory again through it. So that's been really key for my recovery over the past 9 years.
And what exactly is the fascia?
Fascia, everybody has fascia within them. It's a spider webbing, if you will, that holds your muscles in place, holds your organs in place. If you've ever taken a whole chicken and you spread the wing or the leg away from the body, you see something that looks like a thin membrane that you can see through. That's fascia. If you've ever broken an arm or a leg and you've had that arm or leg in a cast for weeks, when it's finally removed, one of the things you find is the limb is stiff and it's difficult to move. And that's because fascia has grown around the area to protect it while it's healing. And through movement, you start finding that it's breaking down and you can move again. You'll hear it breaking. You can feel it under your fingers as you're manipulating the skin in that area. In my case, for example, when it starts choking things off, well, I start getting this burning feeling, pins and needles under my skin. And after a session of breaking that down, that goes away. And it's because those areas are allowed once again to have circulation. When you go through a stroke and you're paralyzed to some degree, your sympathetic nervous system goes into overdrive because it's trying to protect those areas that were affected. It's easy for the fascia to get in there and start choking things off. If you've ever seen women when they have osteoporosis, if you keep moving your head forward in front of your body, then you're telling your body that's where you want your head located, and it starts building fascia around those areas to give you what you're asking. So that would be another example of it.
I was gonna say, it sounds like it's like the body is just sort of continually wrapping something up in packing tape to keep everything secure, which is great, but you only need so much. And when you have too much packing tape around that stuff, nothing can move and nothing can get done.
Yeah, when you have too much of it, it starts stagnating your system. Yeah, yeah.
And then your neuromuscular massage breaks down and pulls out a bunch of that tape, as well as just regular movement.
Yeah, you can go on YouTube and you can look up a video called the fuzz speech, and a doctor actually shows you what it looks like and how when he touches it, it disappears. That's what the neuromuscular massage therapy does, is it breaks that down. For me, it's just been a game changer for years.
That's great. We'll definitely have links to that video in the show notes. As you went through this process, now most of us we're used to talking about brain strokes. Yours was in your spinal cord.
Yeah.
So what is the mechanics around a stroke like that?
They told me afterwards, it's one thing to have a stroke on the brain. They told me what I had, I shouldn't have survived it. At one point, somebody told me I had less than a 1% chance of surviving a stroke on my spinal cord. The stroke was literally the size, if you took a sewing needle and you looked at the size of the point on the needle, that's how big my stroke was, an infarct on my spinal cord. It was that small, and look at the damage it caused, me being paralyzed from the neck down. And all that caused it was while they were in, they went in through my groin, up through my body to work on the right vertebral artery from the inside. The less invasive the surgery was, the better for me. So while they were working where they were working to put the platinum coils in the aneurysm, and then working on the dissection of the artery, they were working right next to my spinal cord. I guess what happened was the trauma they were causing while they were doing that life-saving surgery was enough to cause the stroke to occur. Plus, they were shutting off the blood flow on that artery to do the work they were doing. So that was enough to cause it. And why I survived, I don't know. But I did, and I'm thankful every day I'm still here.
It's Future Bill here for just a moment. I wanted to pop in and talk some anatomy here because we just heard quite a bit of what goes on in the body. Jeffrey just shared a lot of medical info, and let's unpack that a bit. He was having surgery to treat an aneurysm and dissection in his right vertebral artery, and they were using coils. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, there are 4 arteries that bring blood to the brain: the left and right carotid and the left and right vertebral arteries. The carotids are towards the front of the neck. When you see someone sort of checking for a person's pulse by feeling their neck, they are feeling for the carotid artery. In TV and movies, when the murderer slices the victim's neck to kill them, they are usually slicing the carotid arteries to let the blood come out super quick, which is super deadly. The vertebral arteries, on the other hand, are towards the back of the neck. They actually go up through the spinal column, through the bones, which is both good and bad. I mean, the bones of the spinal column actually provide some protection against outside injury. The problem is that those bones also mean that the vertebral arteries don't have as much flexibility to move when the rest of the head goes through dramatic motion. When a chiropractor causes a stroke, it's usually because they did a neck adjustment that caused injury to one of the vertebral arteries. It can also happen in things like car crashes or other things that provide sudden and significant G-forces to the neck. A number of guests on this show have said their stroke was caused by a vertebral artery dissection. Now, that doesn't mean that the artery split open and spilled blood into the rest of the body. It means that there was a tear in the inner lining of the artery, and some of the epithelial material, that inner surface, basically sort of starts flapping in the flow of blood. That tear creates an area of turbulence that, of course, disrupts that flow of blood. Now, that disruption allows some extra junk to accumulate and for blood clots to form. Clots that form there, though, are not strongly attached, and they can free themselves just from just the nature of the blood pressure going through there and the turbulence and all of that other stuff. And once they do free themselves, they continue with the flow of the blood into the brain until they encounter a blood vessel that is smaller than they are, deeper in the brain, and they block it. That then becomes an ischemic stroke, a blood clot blocking the flow of blood within the brain. So Jeffrey had a vertebral artery dissection. What he also had was an aneurysm. Now, an aneurysm is a weak spot in the wall of a blood vessel. It's a spot that will seem to bulge out like a bubble in the side of a garden hose. Lots of people have aneurysms, but we'll never know unless they get a brain scan like an MRI, or they start experiencing huge migraines like Carmen de la Paz did. We talked to her earlier in the year. The other way you find out you have an aneurysm is that you actually have a hemorrhagic stroke. Hemorrhagic stroke happens when a blood vessel fails and blood leaks out or bursts out of a blood vessel and into the brain, where it wreaks all sorts of havoc. Remember, brain tissue likes to be super close to blood, but never actually in contact with the blood. Now, to treat an aneurysm, if it's one that needs to be treated like Jeffrey's did, surgeons will run a tool from a blood vessel in the groin up through the body with the intent of coiling the aneurysm. So basically what they planned to do was stuff that aneurysm in Jeffrey's vertebral artery with wire. So you're going to fill that bubbled spot with wire so that the blood doesn't flow into it and push against that weak spot and potentially burst it. This is a pretty common way of treating aneurysms. Now, the details of Jeffrey's particular condition made this an especially risky procedure, but it was still better than the alternative. So now, let's go back to our conversation with Jeffrey. After that, you were inpatient for 6 weeks. You set your goal to walk out, and you did. And that is amazing. What is your favorite memory from your time in rehab there?
There's so many. I had to take an approach of, every time somebody would come to see me, I felt so blessed, be it a family member, be it friends. And it's hard enough on them to see somebody that was so alive before suddenly paralyzed. And one of the things that always made me feel good that, hey, I've still got something to offer here, is that I could make somebody laugh and make them laugh. Those were favorite memories for me. My diving buddy, Charlie Brown, who was a police officer there in the Charlotte area, the hospital was on his patrol or in his patrol area. So he would come by every day to see me. And some of the days, if I was down in physical therapy working, he would go down to my room. He's in his uniform, and a nurse would come up and say, "Oh, can I help you?" And he would say, "Yes, I'm here to see Jeffrey Morse." And the nurse would say, "Is everything okay?" And he would sternly look at the nurse and say, "Well, I can't talk about that right now." And sometime later, I'm coming back to the room, and the nurse would come up and say, "Hey, there was a police officer here that wanted to talk to you. Is everything okay?" And I would just sternly look back at the nurse and say, "Well, I can't talk about that right now." So, little things like that were funny. The day the speech therapist came in to test my cognitive skills, that was actually a very rough day. That was the week that I had the surgery. I had the surgery on a Monday, and on this particular Thursday, I think it was, Charlie came in to see me that morning, and I'd been thinking about another friend of ours. For whatever reason, the night before, he was on my mind all night. And when Charlie came in the next morning. I said, hey, I got something I need to ask you. I said, I've been thinking about Bill all night. Is Bill okay? And Charlie just looked at me, and I'd seen the look in my past. So I knew when he looked at me in that manner, Bill was gone. And he didn't want to tell me. All of our friends got together and said, oh my God, how are we going to tell Jeff? Jeff's still a question mark. And here Bill died. He blacked out in his bathroom the night before and hit the counter on the way down, and the concussion took his life. While Charlie and I were trying to find our way through the moment, in walks the cognitive specialist. And I said, hey, look, my brain works great. And he says, well, the doctor's ordered this. We have to do the test. And he says, I need you to count back from 100 by 7. So I start ripping through that. And all of a sudden I'm at the end, and Charlie's still stuck on 86. And we were both laughing about it. Then I get this cognitive test of, you know, when you were a kid and you had to do the math problem of the train leaves this station at whatever speed, and you have to figure out what time it's going to get to the next station. It was something along those lines.
Sure.
With a family, a mother, father, 2 children, leaving this station at a particular time, and they're wearing whatever. And anyway, at the end of it, the gentleman's asking me to recall everything. And I'm recalling it all perfectly. And Charlie is sitting next to me in a chair getting it all wrong. And I said, you're a police officer and you're getting all this wrong? Come on, you kidding me here? But, you know, I think he was just doing it on purpose just to lighten the moment.
Sure.
So both of us could, you know, find our way through. And it was good. We both needed it. There were things that happened after the hospital that were actually very funny. My wife asked one of her girlfriends to come over to the house one morning to pick me up, to take me to get my hair cut. And I was just starting to use the walker a little more on that morning. And I got dressed. I went out through the laundry room door, down a ramp, a wheelchair ramp, managed to close the door behind me. Now I'm going down a second ramp to leave the screen room. And as I get to the bottom of the ramp, I'd been losing a little weight at that point, and I forgot to put a belt on that morning. Well, as I get to the bottom of the ramp, my pants fall down to my ankles. And I'm standing there and I'm looking up at the sky and I'm saying, God, why are you doing this? What did I do that was so wrong? And I'm waiting for my wife's girlfriend to come pick me up. And I'm thinking, oh God, she's going to round the corner on the driveway and see this and say, hey, I didn't sign up for this. So now I've got to figure out, how do I let go of the walker to pull my pants back up? And I'm thinking the whole time, you can't make this stuff up. And all I can think is God must be sitting up in heaven right now, rolling over in laughter that he's doing all this to me. And, you know, what was it saying overall? Hey, bud, lighten up. Everything's going to be okay. So, you know, I got the pants back up, and lo and behold, here comes my wife's friend around the corner. And after I got my hair cut, I got back home and told my wife about it, and she was in total hysterics. So, you know, so isn't it great that life hands us those little curveballs, if you will, and those things happen. So get on with life and don't forget to laugh. You know, smiling is definitely part of the routine. So
absolutely. If you know, a lot of times if you don't laugh, you cry. So you may as well laugh.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember discovering, and you know, some of the challenges early in the days, and thinking, you know what, rolling over in bed after a stroke is harder than rolling over a 401k, and
yeah.
and just all those things that you just encounter after you've had to you know, call over the intercom for somebody to come and lift you in the crane over to the bedside commode. You're like, well, here we go.
Yeah. It's amazing all the challenges you get tossed. You know, it's a heck of a thing when you leave the hospital and now you're back home, and Yeah, there's no nurse there anymore. So you have to figure it out, and you have to figure it out safely and move on. I think the greatest thing about that, though, is yeah, your confidence is still shattered, but the really great thing about getting back home is you're rediscovering your independence and you're recovering your independence. And that's something that's so important throughout our lives to be able to do these things for ourselves. It's I think it's just the greatest thing in the world when, despite the fact that you've had this traumatic setback, you're finding your way forward. You're finding your way through these tests, these hurdles, so you can get on with your life, and that is just so important.
Obviously, this certainly put a crimp in your aviation career. So, I mean, how did you transform your career after stroke?
Well, as long as I've been in this aviation world for 4 decades now, and 2 airlines ago, I started slowing my flying routine down. You just get to a point doing 8, 10, 12 hour legs. It really beats you up. You go out for 3 weeks and you blow through 200 time zones in that period of time. And you get back home and you're home for 2 weeks. And on the last day of the 2 weeks, you're finally back on your time zone, but it's time to go back out of town again.
Huh.
So 2 airlines ago, all of a sudden I find this opportunity. I'm in the training department. When I'm not flying, I'm working on training things, and the training at that airline at that time was all contract, and it was costing us dearly to do all that. Over a month period of time, I put an ROI together, and I did a 15-minute elevator speech with the president of the company and said, hey, here's what it's costing us now. Here's what it could cost us. And oh, by the way, since you want to get this DoD contract, you're not going to get it until we have our own training. So he says, hey, great. When can you get started? And when can you kick it off? I said, give me 4 months. Next thing I know, I'm, pretty much running a training department. And right after I get it kicked off, he says, hey, I'm going to bring another type aircraft online. Can you go through that training and then put a training package together for that? And I said, sure. So little by little, I started coming away from flying and doing more training. Now here I am 25 years later, and I'm still training, only now I'm not flying. So do I miss flying? No. I've punched that ticket. I've checked the box. I've done everything I need to do sitting at the front end of the airplane. Now when I fly, it's for me. It's for a vacation. And I'm perfectly happy sitting in back letting somebody take care of me. From the other aspect of this, though, with training, that was a calling. I wasn't expecting that, but I found I really loved it. And I found I could make a difference with that. And I've always enjoyed giving back throughout my life. And this was another way of doing it. And I really took to it and loved it. So back in 2015, 3 years after the stroke, I was telling a therapist one day in December of 2014 when she asked, what would you like to do in the new year? And I was saying, well, gee, I'd love to go back to work. And I get out to my car right after that session, and I'm getting a phone call from some old flying friends. And they said, hey, we're in the middle of this startup airline, and we need you to come to work for us. Can you put a training program together for us? And I said, gee, I'd love to, but let me tell you my situation. And when I did, I said, you know what, guys, why don't you guys talk about this on your own? And if you decide this is in the too hard to do category, I'm okay if you tell me no. Well, the very next day, they're calling back and they're saying, look, we need your brain. We don't care what condition your body's in. If we need you to throw you in a wheelchair, we'll throw you in a wheelchair. Just get down here right now. So I said, all right. So now all of a sudden, I'm packing every month to leave North Carolina to go down to Miami to put a training program together at this new startup airline. It was another international cargo airline. And I'm suddenly back in the saddle, and Now I'm trying to figure out, hey, how do I stand for 8 hours and talk and make my body stand at a podium or walk away from the podium? How do I make all that happen? How do I regulate my energy management? Because now I'm really in a new, environment here, and I'm on my own. So little by little, I figured it out. And as time went on, I took on a little more, and suddenly I'm in a simulator and I'm teaching in the simulator, and it was all feeling really good. And my friends were always very supportive of me, always there for me. And, you know, that was just absolutely perfect. And it just solidified how much I have really loved this industry and all the friends that you have throughout, and how you're always there for one another. And I was extremely thankful for that while I was there. But then, time moved on, and I started realizing I was getting tired of packing a bag, and I found a job here in the Charlotte area with a small commuter airline. And now I teach young people coming into the airline industry for the first time. And it's great working with them and giving back in that capacity too.
Well, that's great. I work as a corporate trainer as well. I teach people software and online services. And one of the things that I have found coming out of this experience and going through PT and OT is there's a lot of overlap between what they do and what corporate trainers do, since either way we're teaching. And I think there's a lot of things we can learn in the adult education space from, what the physical therapists are doing. So we've talked a little bit about why you chose to write the book, because there really wasn't that path to follow when you had your stroke. That's actually kind of why I started this show, is that there wasn't really the podcast I needed when I had the stroke, so I decided to just go ahead and start it.
Yeah.
But I mean, what was your writing process like? How did you go ahead and pull this together? Were you able to leverage what you've done in developing training curricula, or?
Well, when everything happened with the paralysis, the first thing on my mind was I'm going to start setting goals, and I'm going to even set outrageous goals, things that I knew I couldn't do right now that I would be able to do one day. And one of the things that I wanted to figure out how to do first was I wanted to journal. I wanted to talk about everything and have a record of what was going on. And at first, I can't hold a pencil or a pen. Could I get at least one finger working where maybe I could figure out how to start typing on my phone? So over time, I was finally able to conquer that. And I started journaling. As months and years went on, little by little, I'm meeting more goals and I'm doing more journaling. And then after my trip to Nepal in 2016, I decided it was time to start writing this book. I was working at my last airline at that point, and I might put in up to an 18-hour day at work, get back to the hotel, and I would sit down. And since I'm mostly right side affected with this, and I was right side dominant before all this occurred, now I'm having to use my left hand. And I would sit down after work in my hotel room and I would start writing. And I was literally doing all the writing one-handed, typing with my left hand. And I typed the entire book with my left hand. I had a ghostwriter helping me through the process. She told me when I first started working with her, she said, I will typically work with an author once a week. We'll speak for about 30 minutes, and all I expect out of you is at least a paragraph each time we talk. Well, suddenly that's turning into where we're talking 3 times a week. We're talking for 2 hours, and I'm giving her 8 to 10 pages each time I talk to her, to the extent that she would say, "Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I've got so much here, I can't keep up with you." And she was laughing, saying, you're disabled and you're giving me more work than anybody I've ever worked with. And I'm laughing and having a great time as we're doing this. And I was saying the exact same thing. And the other thing that was great about working with my ghostwriter, Bonnie Hearn Hill, she pulled things out of me that I was afraid to talk about. And I didn't realize I was afraid to talk about it until she was pulling it out of me. One of the things that I really found that I enjoyed with journaling, and then I found it even more so in writing the book, was writing the book was becoming my psychologist. I was becoming my own psychologist in what I was writing. And I was finding peace and I was healing psychologically from putting all this down. And I was finding it to an extent through my journaling over the years, but it didn't even compare to what I was doing as I was writing the book. And I felt extremely thankful for that, and thankful to Bonnie for pulling out of me things that I wanted to bury and I wasn't comfortable talking about. And in her pulling that out of me, I was getting better. Going into this process with a stroke, and as you start your recovery, at least for me, I was finding that I was thinking this recovery process was 80% physical and 20% psychological. And the more I got into this, and as time went on, I started finding just the opposite. It was 80% psychological and 20% physical. When I started writing the book in 2017, I was pretty shocked at how much writing was helping me heal and get beyond what was holding me back. If you want to talk about things like depression, one of the things the book was helping me do with things like that was figuring out how to let go. And that was really important. The other thing that helped me with that was my neuromuscular massage therapist. She was helping me figure out how to let go. And in June of 2016, one day during a therapy session, she looked me right in the eye and she said, you need to start telling yourself you're okay. You survived this and you're okay. I was 4 years into this at that point, and nobody up to this point had ever said anything like that to me. And it was the most profound thing I'd ever experienced in my life, that somebody saying this to me, and I'm finding that my proprioception's increasing. Hey, great. But when it came to this, my proprioception was flatlined. I didn't even realize that I needed to say that to myself. And when I did, I found that I felt better with that too. So that was becoming my guiding light, to say to myself, hey, I'm okay. And as I wrote the book, I kept saying that over and over to myself, I'm okay. And I feel like I'm letting go a little more each time, the more I talk about everything that happened. And I equally thought this would be important for others in our situation, because if I'm going through it, I can't be the only one. There must be others out there that are going through this too. So wouldn't it be good if I could write about it and tell my story? And in telling my story, other people realize that they're okay too. And maybe they can say that to themselves as well.
That simple validation is just incredibly powerful.
It is for all of us. And, I don't think we realize it until somebody says it to us. And that was the reason for writing this book, to not only talk about everything that I had to find my way through with my limitations, no matter what they were, no matter how stressful they were or how they might bring on depression. But it was equally to say, I wasn't going to let it beat me down and win. I wasn't going to let my limitations define me. I was going to find a way to enjoy this second chance at life, and to live it and to be happy with it. And I am. And that's why it was so important to me to share this story with everyone.
Even with all that and with that focus and with that, the positive stuff that it brings into your life. I mean, what was the biggest struggle with actually writing the book?
The biggest struggle for me at times was not so much writing it, but during the editing phase, having to continually go through and read it and reread what I was going through during that period of time. And then thinking to myself, my God, how did I do that? And the other thing I found of it as I was reading those areas was it was making me not only relive the moment, but relive the thought processes I was having during that moment. And that's where I started realizing I know I'm not the only one that's going to be feeling this. And I feel like what I'm writing here is going to connect with others. And as difficult as it was to, put those raw emotions down on paper, which Bonnie was trying to pull out of me, and it was difficult to open that box that I buried within me to let everything out. I was so happy and relieved that I was able to do that, but I wasn't able to do it on my own. I needed help doing it. And for that, I'm extremely grateful that she helped me pull that out of me so I could put that on paper. But then beyond it, the other thing that was important in this struggle to survive is to realize with everything that you do to find your way back, at some point, you have to stop and say, why am I doing this? Why am I beating on myself so hard to get back this thing that I want so badly? And that thing is living your life. And it's easy to get so caught up in our recovery to forget why we're doing this. And that's why 4 years into it, I finally decided it was time to take a vacation. And I decided to go someplace I'd never been. I'm going to go there on my own. I'm going to go for 2 weeks, and I'm going to find the most insane adventures I can find to go do. And if I do some of them, great. If I do all of them, great. But if I only do half of them, at least I can say I tried. I went there and did every one of the insane things that I set up to do. And not only was I happy for it, but at one point during the 2 week vacation, I was given an opportunity to help another human being. And at that moment, I was very grateful that I got to give back to another human being in the manner that I did. And even that was healing. It was healing to meet so many wonderful people along the way, and to have an adventure once again that gave me something to talk about other than everything I was going through every day. That's where I talk about, or what I mean by getting back into your life. So you have something new to share with people other than this thing we share and talk about every day with our recovery. Wouldn't it be great to go do something new and have those new memorable experiences to talk about instead of what we go through each and every day? So that's why it was important to go on that vacation. And it did everything I wanted it to do and that much more.
So after you've gone ahead, you've done all this work, you have this manuscript now. It's time to go ahead and publish it. So why did you choose to publish with Brown Books Publishing?
I was doing some looking around at the time, and I actually got to a point where I asked my ghostwriter, Bonnie, if she had any recommendations. And she immediately recommended Brown Books to me. They're a hybrid publisher. I contacted them through her and gave them my manuscript, and they looked it over and they fell in love with it immediately. And one of the things they fell in love with was me describing paralysis for people who have no idea what paralysis is or what that means or how it affects you. I described that in the book, and it was jaw-dropping to them as they sat around their conference table reading the manuscript, and they contacted me and wanted to sign right away. So the process of finding a publisher, that took me 2 years to go through that entire process to find somebody that would take me on as a new writer. And I knew I didn't want to self-publish. I knew that was going to hinder me with, getting the books printed for starters. But then I'm my own advocate there with going around to bookstores and asking if they will buy a few copies of my book. That was simply not going to work due to my limitation. I knew I needed to do this in this manner, and I was bound and determined to do everything I could to make that happen. It took a long time, looking over publishers and how do they run their process, and how is that going to work for me. It was a very long process to bring all that together, and I was just so happy that Brown Books decided to take me on. They have been absolutely spectacular with me, working for me from day one, and I'm grateful to them each and every day for all they've done since day one through this entire process. So I'm extremely grateful to them, from Millie Brown, the owner, to my publisher on down. Everybody has just been absolutely spectacular, and I'm grateful every day to each of them. My publisher, Tom Real, oh my God, just spectacular. Right down to Cassidy, the marketing lady that helps me set up the podcast interviews. I'm grateful to each and every one of them. And every time I email them, I tell them each and every time how grateful I am for all their help with me.
And Cassidy's been great to work with. Too.
Yeah.
So now that you've brought funding forward to market now, what recommendations do you have for other survivors who are thinking about writing a book?
Recommendations I would have are definitely write your story. Everybody who has gone through what we've gone through wants to read stories like that. They're important. The hope and the inspiration that comes out of those stories is massively important to each and every one of us. But it's not just us. It's not just our community you're reaching out to. You're reaching out to people with trauma. It doesn't have to be what we went through. It could be somebody with PTSD coming back from a war zone. You are reaching out and affecting so many people when you write your story. So the first recommendation I have comes from my ghostwriter, Bonnie, which is, and this one's the most important one of all, butt in chair. You are not going to write this thing unless you sit down and commit to it. So butt in chair is the first recommendation that I have, and that's serious. Beyond that, journaling your experiences along the way. Journal every chance that you get, and then use those notes to formulate this story and how you're going to bring it together. What do you want to start with, and where do you want to end with it? And let that be the starting point as you do that. Having a ghostwriter certainly helps, but if you don't, do your best with it, and then find the publisher that works best for you, and start talking to them about your story, giving them your manuscript. If you've got a full manuscript, great. That's important. It's showing how serious you are and how committed you are to your venture. Those may not seem very big, but they are, each and every one of them. But I can't say enough about butt and chair. You've got to sit down and commit to it. Thinking about it doesn't get you there. The last thing I would say of it is do this because you want to do this, not because you have to. That's what gets you committed into telling this story. And don't be afraid to open those boxes within you and talk about those areas that you're afraid of. That's what people want to hear. They want to hear your vulnerability because they have that too. And when you talk about it, you're now in touch with everybody as you're speaking of what affected you. So, yes, people want to hear those stories. I know I want to hear them. It's important. It's very important. Look at all we're going through right now with the pandemic and look at how paralyzed people are. People who don't have limitations suddenly do have limitations, and their limitation is maybe they've sat home for so long and are afraid to go out that their social skills are now limited. There's so many parallels with somebody who's actually paralyzed to people who have paralyzed themselves over what we're going through with the pandemic. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's certainly parallels there. So telling your story helps those people too. So tell your story.
And that brings us to our hack of the week. But first, let's talk about sponsor Modus Nova. Modus Nova helps brain injury survivors recover the use of an affected limb with the power of neuroplasticity and repetition. And video games. The Modus Hand is an air-powered, AI-controlled robotic exoskeleton. It helps you move your hand to complete actions in the video games you play on the included touchscreen monitor. Recovering an affected hand or foot requires thousands of repetitions of the motions. The Modus Hand and Modus Foot help you do that without getting bored. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. Use promo code STROKECAST for 10% off your first month. And now back to our hack of the week.
Carry a small flashlight with you on your keychain. Make sure you've always got a flashlight with you in your pocket. So if you get out of a car at night and suddenly there's no light, you've got a means of lighting the area in front of you. That's always important for me to make sure there's always light there. It's so easy to get out of a car or you turn a light off in a room or somebody turns a light off in a room and the room's dark and you can't see your feet anymore. And you need to see your feet to move forward. So, have a small pen light in a pocket or attached to something you carry with you everywhere.
So after all is said and done, here we are 9 years later. You've been able to rethink a lot of things in life, put out a book, adjust your career, do some amazing things. After all this, was the stroke a blessing or a curse?
It was a blessing. In the beginning, I asked God many times, why did you do this to me? What did I do in my life that was so bad that I needed to experience this? And, as time went on, I started thinking to myself, well, maybe this was done to bring light to something better later on in life. I found earlier this year a good friend of mine that I've flown with for over 25 years all over the world. He had a stroke and it affected his memory, his long-term and his short-term memory. And I flew out to Denver to see him and his wife. And I found in the week that I was spending with them that I was helping both of them see through the trauma and realize that things aren't so bad. And it was great to be able to talk through the things we go through with strokes. And the other thing that was really great was that my friend Lee and I could talk about fun times that he still remembered. And it reminded me that I must have gone through this for a reason, and here it is. Now it's finally showing itself to me and why I went through everything that I went through, because now I could talk to somebody else who's now going through this for the first time and try to take some of the shock value out of it and help them realize that, yes, everything is okay. Everything will be okay. Just let things settle down and know that you've got somebody there if you ever need to talk. And that really made me feel good. So am I happy or sad that it happened to me? I'm actually happy it happened to me. I really am. I feel so blessed every day for all the people I get to talk to and listen to their stories. And it feels good in this manner to give back as well.
So, Jeff, that is amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
They can reach me on my website, Jeffrey, Jeffrey, middle initial A, Morse, Morse.com. You can reach me on social media on Facebook at Jeffrey A. Morse or Finding Forward. You can find me either on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter on any of those. And I'm anxiously awaiting to meet everybody that wants to reach out and say hi. So I enjoy that so much, being able to talk to people, especially people that are going through what you and I are going through. It just feels so good to be able to give back and talk to everybody.
Let's talk for a moment about sponsor Like-Minded. Like-Minded is a nonprofit membership program that helps you live your best post-stroke life. Like-Minded offers classes on everything from hand exercises to how to tell your story. The virtual classes are led by survivors, occupational therapists, physical therapists, doctors, and more. In fact, many of them are led by guests from prior episodes of the Strokecast. These classes are held throughout the week, but if you can't attend the one you want, it's okay, because members get access to the recorded version of the session, so you can still catch up and consume all the content that you want. If you have a specific question, reach out through the private text messaging group that's part of the program. Get the support that you need and deserve to live your best life. To find out if Like-Minded is right for you, visit strokecast.com/likeminded. Use promo code STROKECAST to save 20% off your first month. Jeffrey's story is a powerful one of the power of focus and mindset to help you get through the worst moments of your life. His experiences as a pilot, as an instructor, as a veteran who got through survival school and more, all helped shape his mind to focus on the immediate priority, to keep flying the airplane. Generally, when you have a problem in an airplane, if you have altitude, you have options. If you can keep it flying, you have the opportunity to fix it or to address the problem that you have. But you gotta keep it flying. Attitude and mindset are essential to recovery and living the life you deserve after stroke, but they aren't enough. You need the right people around you, the right medical care, the right minimal physical and neurological condition, etc. While the right mindset isn't enough to guarantee success, the key thing to keep in mind is that the wrong mindset is enough to guarantee failure. The right mindset will help you continue to fly the plane. And as long as you have altitude, you have options. That's it for this week. You can find Jeffrey's website, all his links, link to his book, Finding Forward, and a link to the video all about fascia in the show notes and at strokecast.com/findingforward. Be sure to share this episode with someone you know by giving them the link, strokecast.com/findingforward. Subscribe to the free monthly Strokecast email newsletter at strokecast.com/news. And of course, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.